Welcome to Linguistically Aware, the podcast about all things linguistics. You are listening to CJSW 90.9 FM, broadcasting out of Calgary, Alberta at the University of Calgary campus radio station, located on Treaty 7 land. I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. The City of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. My name is Brooklyn Shepard, and I'm a PhD student in linguistics at the University of Calgary. In this conversation-based podcast, I sit down with linguists, or language experts, to talk about the ways language and linguistics interacts with our daily lives. In this episode, I sit down with James Geary, author of the New York Times bestselling book, The World in a Phrase, A Brief History of the Aphorism. In this interview, we discuss the second edition of this book, which was just released on November 10th, 2025. James is the author of several best-selling books on language, and he's also an adjunct lecturer in public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. He is also the former deputy curator of the Nieman Foundation for Journalism at Harvard and the former editor of the European edition of Time magazine. In this interview, we chat about James's longtime love of aphorisms, what makes them such a unique part of human language and culture, and why this aspect of language is more important now than ever in the digital storm that is social media and AI chatbots like ChatGPT. The World in a Phrase, A Brief History of the Aphorism, is out now, so if this interview piques your interest as much as it did mine, be sure to go check it out. So, first of all, thank you so much, James, for joining me. I'm very excited to have you here on Linguistically Aware. And I was wondering if you could start by introducing yourself to our audience, telling us a little bit about what you do and your background before we dive into this awesome book.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me, Brooklyn. I'm super excited to be here as well. My name is James Geary, and I am an aphorism addict. I guess that's the first part of my job description that I should share. I've written this book, the second edition of The World in a Phrase, A Brief History of the Aphorism. So I'm an author. I've written books about aphorisms, about metaphor, about wit. So all these books are also very linguistically aware. And they have to do with language, and they're not academic books. There's a lot of academic research and scientific research in the books, but they're very popular in the sense that they have to do with how we use language and how language uses us in everyday life. So I'm an author. I also teach writing at the Harvard Kennedy School, and I've worked as a journalist and editor for many, many years.
Awesome. Yeah, that's it's really nice to hear about your background, because I'm interested as we go through this to sort of learn a little bit more about how that's played into this obsession with aphorisms that you've mentioned. But before we dive into that, so as you mentioned, the second edition of your book, The World in a Phrase, A Brief History of the Aphorism, was just released yesterday. And so before we dive into the book, more specifically, I was wondering if, while we're talking about aphorisms, if you could describe to us what an aphorism actually is. So tell us, because I'm sure some of our listeners are not aware, and how is it different from metaphors or proverbs or these other sort of literary devices or pieces that you've written about before?
Yeah, that is a great question. An aphorism is just a fancy word for a brief, witty, philosophical saying. So, for example, I never let school interfere with my education. That's Mark Twain. That's an aphorism. Mm-hmm. It's short. It's got this like lovely little twist of logic, and it's sort of like one way to think of an aphorism is like a joke, but shorn of everything except the punchline. And the punchline is sometimes funny, like Mark Twain is often funny, but another characteristic, essential characteristic of aphorisms is they're philosophical. And by that I don't mean like some esoteric, kind of philosophy about abstract forms or anything like that, but I mean philosophy in daily life. Um, how do we live our lives? What is a good life? The essential philosophical questions of what should I do with my life? Who am I? How do I find out who I am? Aphorisms help us figure these kind of things out. Um, and it's the oldest written literary form on the planet. Got started 5,000 or so years ago in ancient Egypt and ancient China. And so it existed long before written literature did as sayings. And some of the most ancient practitioners like Muhammad and Buddha and Jesus and the Zen teachers, they all spoke in aphorisms. Um, and it's different from, well, you mentioned proverbs and metaphors. Like one of the differences between an aphorism and a proverb is an aphorism always has um, an identifiable author.
Mm.
So there's a saying, fools rush in where angels fear to tread, um, which is a lovely line. But I think very few people today know that that line was originally written by Alexander Pope, who was an 18th century English poet. And the only thing differentiating that from a proverb, when the last person on earth who knows that Alexander Pope wrote that, when that person dies, it will become a proverb because it will no longer have an identifiable author. And then finally, very briefly, aphorisms are different than metaphors. A metaphor is when you equate one thing with another, but aphorisms work by metaphor. And in fact, some aphorisms are 100% metaphor. There's nothing literal in them. Like there's a great aphorism by a Polish aphorist, Stanislaw Jerzy Letz. No snowflake in an avalanche ever feels responsible. You think about that, and if you try and interpret that literally, it's like that is nonsense. It's like a sequitur. It doesn't mean anything.
Hmm.
It's 100% metaphor, but the metaphor kind of triggers the storytelling mechanism in our brains, and we make the connection between no snowflake and an avalanche ever feels responsible and groupthink.
Hmm.
How when you're part of a group, the drive towards consensus can make everybody choose a course of action that everybody knows will lead to disaster and catastrophe. But because it's a group decision, no one feels responsible to stand up and say, I'm not so sure about this. Maybe we should do something else. So yeah, those are some of that's a kind of a definition and some of the differences with other forms of short literature.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love the examples that you give, and I love that you can just pull them out of your brain like that. I mean, I guess I should expect that given that you are an aphorism addict, as self-proclaimed.
Yes.
Um,
I'm
uh,
not even recovering addict.
yeah, like yeah, it was just very nice to hear those examples because, like, for me, from a linguistics background, I think it's just such an interesting piece of language and the way we use language. And so, like you've mentioned that in your book and elsewhere that aphorisms have interested you for a very long time, like since you were a kid. So I'm wondering how did this obsession start? Like that seems like an interesting
Yes.
hobby for a child. And do you find that your background now, like now that you are a little bit, you have a little bit more of a background in journalism and literature, have those changed at all? How you approach studying aphorisms or appreciating aphorisms from when you were a kid?
Yeah. So I first discovered aphorisms at the tender age of 8 in Reader's Digest, which maybe a lot of your listeners will have heard of, even if they haven't encountered a physical copy of it in some time. But when I was growing up, there were no books in our house when I was growing up. There were only two things to read. One was Reader's Digest, and the other was Time magazine. And in Reader's Digest, every issue there's a page of quotable quotes, which are well, yeah, I guess they're quotable quotes. They're interesting things that people have said, and often by celebrities, but sometimes just ordinary people or well-known writers. And we had a copy of Reader's Digest always in the bathroom, along with a copy of Time magazine. And just paging through, I came across the quotable quotes section, and I still remember the aphorism, the first aphorism that I remember reading was from when I was 8 years old, and it was this one: "The difference between a rut and a grave is the depth."
Hmm.
And I was 8, so I had never heard of aphorisms, and I also didn't know what that particular saying quite meant. But I knew that, I don't know, there's something special about the way that it was written, and I knew there was something special about the thought behind it, and I knew there was something playful about it, and I knew there was something mysterious about it. And aphorisms are sort of like puzzles. You're given a little bit of information and you have to kind of figure out the mystery to it. And I was really intrigued by that as an 8-year-old, but I was just 8, so um, it was only later, in high school, and I started reading novels and essays and poetry, that I began to notice that aphorisms were kind of popping up everywhere. I would be reading a novel and I could see that, well, that one line in that, 300 or 500 word paragraph, that 8 word sentence can stand on its own as an aphorism. And then I started discovering that there were people who actually did this for a living.
Yeah.
People like Stanislav Jerzy Letts, who I mentioned. He didn't write books or novels or nonfiction or essays. He just wrote sentences,
Hmm.
individual sentences. So there's people like him and La Rochefoucauld, famous French aphorist from the 17th century, who only wrote aphorisms. But I also discovered that aphorisms were kind of all around us. You could find them on billboards and advertisements, on T-shirts. It's kind of aphorisms are a kind of way we learn and we think. And so when I got older and I became a journalist, and I've always been a reader since I was young, and I've always wanted to be a writer since I was very, very young. And then I started actually doing it and realizing it's really hard. Writing is really difficult. Writing well is really difficult. So I ended up actually working for Time magazine as a writer and editor, and that's really where I learned the value of concision and precision. Because as a journalist, you're reporting on things and you have to do so concisely and precisely and accurately. And when I worked for Time, I had the benefit of being edited by really, really good editors. And the magazine as a whole placed a high value, not just on really good reporting, but really fine writing.
Hmm.
So that I was not just edited for the information in my article, but I was edited for the expression of that information. And that's where I kind of learned to craft or try to craft fine sentences. And it's not like every article I wrote was one aphorism after another. That would be actually horrible now that I think about it. Um, but just the discipline of writing short and being very, very pointed, but packing in um, a lot of complexity into a little space. That's essentially the art of the aphorism.
Hmm.
And I learned that as a writer. I write aphorisms too, through being edited and having to write about really complex things in a very small amount of space. So professionally, it helped me kind of develop as a writer, that aphoristic instinct, if I can
Hmm.
put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. Like, I mean, of course that you got interested in this so young, but also its connection to being able to put such complex information to a small amount of language, I guess. Um, yeah. So I'm wondering how this like if you found that in your writing and in through that editing process, so if you found that you just sort of are writing aphorisms themselves, like have you just sort of accidentally become an aphorist?
I'm an accidental aphorism addict.
Yes.
That's not easy to say. I would, so yeah, there's a couple I'd love to kind of categorize and try and understand aphorisms.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've also come up with descriptions of the various ways that people compose aphorisms. And one of them is the spontaneous combustion, what I call the spontaneous combustion method. And that is what someone like Stanislav Let's did. So he would be out having drinks with friends at a pub or something like that, and he'd think of something and he'd scroll it on a napkin and tuck it in his pocket. So they kind of came to him individually, but kind of spontaneously. Um, then there's other what I call the deliberate composition method, and that's someone like La Rochefoucauld, who I also mentioned. You know, his aphorisms are some of the most yeah, some of the greatest aphorisms ever written, I think. But he would write like several paragraphs, and then he'd go back and revise
Mm.
and kind of pare excess language away and shorten sentences. And so he would kind of, through a process of distillation, he'd take several paragraphs and compress it into a single sentence. So he was deliberately crafting the aphorisms, whereas Let's is just, they're just popping into his head. Um, and for my own practice, there's the other, I haven't thought of a suitable name for this method yet, but maybe if I can borrow your accidental aphorist is the kind of a good one. I find that they occur when I'm writing something else. So, like if I'm writing a book, for example, they're like in my book about wit, I wrote this one sentence that I'll tell you the sentence. The numinous is the nitty-gritty. And my point was that like the things that are like spiritual or immaterial, that's like philosophical, spiritual, psychological, you actually find them in the nitty-gritty things of everyday life.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just writing that section of the book and trying to express that, and that sentence came into my head. But I wasn't thinking like, I have to write an aphorism about
Mm-hmm.
this. And that section of the book is, hundreds of words long, but that you can take that one sentence out and it kind of, it's like like a hologram has all the information in this little tiny space of a full kind of 3D representation. That's kind of what an aphorism is. It's just this little thing, but once you illuminate it, it's kind of expands into this full figure. So I think there's the spontaneous combustion, deliberate composition, and then thanks to you, Brooklyn, there's the accidental aphorists.
Awesome. Um, so we've talked a lot about aphorisms. So now I would like to talk about the book that is also about aphorisms. But
finally, thank you. You get to talk about the book.
So, like I mentioned, this is the second edition of the book, and the first edition was published about 20 years ago, right?
Right.
And so in that time, the world has changed a lot. We've had social media platforms have proliferated, like Twitter or now X, which you've noted places sort of a premium on brevity. And so I'm wondering what your thoughts are on how this sort of the digital age and the rise of things like memes and hot takes have affected the aphorism, which, like you mentioned, is such an old form of literature and of language.
Yeah. So yeah, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring out this second edition, because the first edition came out. Facebook existed in 2005 when the book was first published, but Twitter didn't. And of course, social media was nowhere near as dominant as it is now. And so you would think that the shortest form of literature would be ideally suited for the shortest forms of technological communication. And it is, but I would say most social media posts are like anti-aphoristic. They're not just non-aphoristic, they're the opposite of aphorisms. And like, rage posts and hot takes and aphorisms are short, but they're not knee-jerk reactions. And aphorisms invite you to think further. They kind of challenge you. They don't reconfirm your already held beliefs, and they certainly don't further entrench whatever biases you may already have. And I think a lot of online discourse does just that. Um, it's not about it's not about open debates or opening minds. It's about rage posts and kind of just a form of trolling, really, that is the opposite of what aphorisms are intended to do. So that's one aspect of how aphorisms may or may not fit into like the current ways we communicate. But there's also people who are using it for very aphoristic purposes. And one of the examples I give in the book is the X account for the Ukrainian government, and they are experts at using aphorisms to, in essentially the kind of the online rhetorical resistance to the Russia's full scale invasion of their country. So there's a great example from last summer, the 80th anniversary of D-Day, and there's a beautiful moment when an American World War II veteran, a veteran of D-Day, met President Zelensky of Ukraine, and they were having this really emotional, touching encounter. And President Zelensky, the World War II veteran, he must have been close to 100, if not in his hundreds. He was in a wheelchair, and President Zelensky kind of knelt down beside the wheelchair so they could be at eye level with each other. And there's a video of it, so you can search online for it. It's very, very moving. But the Ukraine government X account took that video and put an aphorism as the caption: "We kneel before heroes, not invaders."
Hmm.
And I think that's a great example of using, like combining visual and verbal communication in a social media post to make an aphoristic statement. And the aphorism is like a powerful form of aphorisms are the superpower of the powerless in many ways. And someone like Stanislav Lec, he lived during Soviet times in Poland, and his aphorisms were a form of resistance. So using aphorisms on social media in the way that the Ukrainian government does, I think is a very effective, I don't want to talk in military terms, but maybe maybe it's appropriate in this case. It's it's the rhetorical battle that exposes the hypocrisy and brutality of what Russia is doing. And I think it's also a way for Ukrainians to feel empowered and to kind of boost morale and boost resilience to see that encounter between those two men, and then have that really powerful political message of resistance, resilience, and independence. It shows how powerful aphorisms can be in this new medium.
You're listening to Linguistically Aware, broadcasting on CJSW 90.9 FM on Treaty 7 land. Listen to this episode or any other episode of Linguistically Aware in full at cjsw.com or Apple Podcasts. Just search Linguistically Aware. If you'd like to learn more about linguistics at the University of Calgary, be sure to visit our website, calgarylinguistics.ca. Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting that, like, like just how powerful they can be. But as you know, it's not like a lot of people don't use social media for such a purpose. In fact, the opposite, or and that actually makes me think of, like, as you mentioned, like on social media, there's sort of, we can become very siloed in terms of like, like we are exposed to only these things that the algorithm knows that we like or don't like. And that makes me think about becoming like further siloed in terms of like AI programs like ChatGPT, and that same sort of feedback loop of just sort of surrounding yourself with the things you want to hear, and how aphorisms sort of go against exactly that. And so I'm wondering, like, you do discuss a little bit in this in the second edition about things like AI programs and like ChatGPT, and discuss the threats posed to our cognitive loads. And so I'm wondering why, as you mentioned, thinking aphoristically is essential to our psychological survival in this era of social media, yes, but also things like AI that, of course, everybody is chatting about now.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I teach writing, so I've taken a personal and I'm a writer, so I take a personal and professional interest in ChatGPT's abilities as a writer. And so I've read I've read a bunch of studies on what happens when people rely or over rely on AI to do their writing for them. And I take the view that writing is thinking. Like, I don't really know what I think about something until I try and write about it. That forces me, and I think it's true of all writing, it forces the writer to really think through at a deep level, what do I really think about ChatGPT, or what do I really think about the Toronto Blue Jays? um, and so if you're not doing your own writing, you're not doing your own thinking. And if you're not doing your own thinking, then I think we are in serious trouble. And so a lot of the studies of ChatGPT and people who use it to either do their writing assignments for them, which is quite common these days among students, high school and college students, or to like help them essentially, maybe not do the whole thing, but help them uh, um, complete whatever writing task they have to complete. What the researchers find is that the more people rely on AI, the less they rely on their own thinking and their own critical thinking skills. And they've come up with this great term, which I absolutely love. It's called over-reliance on AI induces metacognitive laziness. Wow, what a diagnosis. But I think, and of course, there's also AI programs like Friend, programs, AI products like Friend, that is like your friend who's an AI chatbot who will comment on everything you're doing. And I think why I think thinking aphoristically is essential to our psychological survival is that over relying on AI for life decisions can induce not metacognitive laziness, but metaphysical laziness. And it has to do with the philosophical questions that we were talking about at the beginning of the conversation, which are what aphorisms are all about. So I think the danger is if we are offloading these kind of questions onto Friend, or if AI chatbots are just constantly coming back to us with affirmations and validations. And affirmation and validation is great, but sometimes we also need criticism. We need to be challenged. And I think the function of aphorisms to challenge us, to cause us to kind of rethink our beliefs, or look at a problem or a situation in a way that we've never looked at it before. I think that's the essence of their value. And if we're not doing that, then it's like we're not living our own intellectual and emotional lives.
Yeah.
You can outsource your writing to Chat GPT, but I don't want to outsource my brain,
Mm-hmm.
my emotions to Chat GPT. Um, so I think aphorisms, they don't seek to decrease our cognitive loads. They actually increase our cognitive loads. And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And it's actually also a fun thing, because it's fun to confront your, challenges or problems or opportunities in your life and to figure them out for yourself. Um, there's a great aphorism by an Austrian aphorist, Marie von Ebner-Eschenbach, and it goes, "The person who has been carried to the goal should not think that they have arrived." And I always think of that in the context of AI.
Yeah.
Like, AI is doing my writing for me. I shouldn't call myself a writer. If AI is solving my, relationship problems for me, then I'm not really in relationship
Yeah.
with another person or even with myself.
Yeah.
So I'm all for increasing our cognitive loads
Yeah.
through aphorisms.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you draw on that literature in terms of the threat to someone's cognitive load in when over reliance on AI, because we actually we have a new class here in linguistics called
Hmm.
Language in Humans and Machines, where we
Hmm.
talk about exactly that. We talk
Oh,
about
wow.
exactly that. So it's really interesting to sort of hear that from your perspective and the link to aphorisms and thinking aphoristically. I think that could be a really interesting direction for students to think. I mean, not just students, but everyone to think about in terms of their interactions with AI.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's great that you've got a class that's devoted exactly to that, because one of the things that we need to think critically about is how we're going to use AI.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and not just and that's the metaphysical laziness. That's the danger it poses. It's like, oh, AI, it can do this, it can do that. Okay. I mean, it's already happening. And we're just now getting to grips with, like, is this actually a good thing? And there are plenty of incredible applications for AI that can result in wonderful innovations and drug discovery and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's important to think critically about where we draw that line.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so we've talked a lot about the aphorism from, like you've mentioned, a lot of different uh, aphorists and its relationship to, like, it's the oldest form of literature, or the and now we see it in things like social media. And so I'm thinking, like, given this long history, so like some folks you mention in your book and that you've mentioned today are like the Buddha, Mark Twain. And so I'm wondering, from that long history to the digital age today, and these things, aphorisms still persist. I'm wondering why you think, and this is more of a big picture, just sort of thought question, why you think aphorisms are so prevalent in human history across time, but also across cultures.
Yeah, that's a great question. Because I think I think there are sort of archetypal. They address like archetypal situations that we all as human beings address. And this is what all literature, in fact, all art is about, right? It's about birth and death and love and hate, grief, joy, all these kind of archetypal human emotions. And when you're in the midst of one of these or one or more of these archetypal human emotions, it's easy to lose your way. It's easy to be confused. But an aphorism is like it's a piece of hand luggage, you know? It's easy to carry around with you, and you open it up and it's got everything you need in there. It's got your pajamas, a change of shirts, and your toiletries, but it's compact enough that you can take it with you wherever you go. And I think there's a great aphorism by another Polish aphorist whose name is escaping me. I'm sorry about that. No, his last name is Brudzinski. I forget his first name, but it goes like this. The most difficult thing to find is the way to the signposts. And when I'm like in crisis or confused, which kind of happens on a regular basis, I often think of that aphorism because aphorisms are kind of the signposts
Yeah.
that help you find your way. Like Winston Churchill, this aphorism is attributed to him. When you're going through hell, keep going.
Hmm.
And sometimes when you're in the midst of a problem, it could be joy, it could be grief, any kind of intense emotional or psychological situation. We look for signs. What should we do? How should we handle it? How should we respond? And aphorisms then are handy in those kind of emergencies, precisely because they're brief and precisely because they have that kind of psychological insight and philosophical wisdom that can help us in that moment. But crucially, like aphorisms don't solve any of your problems. Like, in fact, they put you further into the problem, increasing your cognitive load. So like greeting cards are the opposite of aphorisms
Hmm.
because they are only kind of reassuring and they are only positive and there's not much philosophical about them. So though aphorisms don't solve any of your problems, they give you a path, they open a path forward, or maybe like they clear a little space in your mind where you can think about it. So one more has just popped into my head. I'm sorry. This is what happens. This is what happens, Brooklyn, when you start asking me these questions. This is by a Swedish aphorist, Wilhelm Eklund, and it goes, to be placed on treacherous ground is good. We only learn to stand on our own 2 feet when the ground is shaking underneath them. And like I find that like really inspiring for some weird reason because it kind of reinforces the sense that like, oh yeah, this is a difficult situation, but I'm going to be okay. And that going through this trial is going to make me a better, stronger person afterwards. And so that comes back to the point about AI. Like if AI is solving all our problems for us and we're never confronted or challenged in that way, we're not going to be able to stand on our own 2 feet like when the power goes out and we don't have access to Chat GPT. So anyway, that's a long-winded answer to the question of why I think aphorisms are like have been so central to human beings for since there have been human beings.
Yeah, yeah. No, I love that. And like one of the reasons I wanted to ask you that question is because as a linguist, one of the things we talk about is that language is uniquely human.
Yeah.
And so it was just very interesting to me, that sort of parallel between this sort of the aphorism as this piece of language that is just very universal. And that's one of the things that linguists often look for in language, is these universals that go through all of humanity. And there's lots of them. And I think this is a really beautiful example of that.
Yeah. And so, but your point about different cultures and different countries, aphorisms are absolutely everywhere in every country and every culture. But every country and every culture, it has a unique kind of character.
Yes. Yeah.
Like the Finnish aphorisms, for some reason, are really bleak, but also very funny. American aphorisms are kind of like upbeat and can have a can-do attitude.
Mm-hmm.
So it's so interesting to see how like a national culture is expressed through its aphorisms.
Yeah. Yeah. So I have one more question for you. We're just about out of time. And so this one's just a little bit of a fun one and maybe a bit of a challenge. So I've heard, and you've sort of mentioned this a few times, that like aphorisms are the essence of great writing, and that anything that can be accomplished in a book can be accomplished in a sentence. And so on that note, since you wrote a book, I was wondering, just for fun, if you were to distill your book into a single sentence, do you have any idea of what that would be?
Oh, I should watch what I write with you, Brooklyn. That's um, but so the point about anything that can be accomplished in a book can be accomplished in a sentence. I think no snowflake in an avalanche is ever feels responsible is a good example of that, because it's got this whole, it's like a novella, you can fill in this whole story. It's got characters, it's got tension, it's got plot and things like that. If I had to summarize my book in a sentence, I hope this is not considered cheating. I can do it, but it's not my own sentence. It's an aphorism by Ralph Waldo Emerson, and it is, life consists of what a person is thinking of all day.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what I think that's so true. Because really, good things, bad things will happen to us, but it's our response to them and it's how we think about them that determines what happens next. And like for aphorisms, I think that's saying by Emerson that life consists of what a person is thinking of all day is so true, because the aphorisms are provoking those kind of philosophical thoughts that we started the conversation by talking about. And if you're thinking about those things, those like big questions in life, then I think that's time well spent.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of self-knowledge and a lot of knowledge about others that can be obtained by just thinking about what you're thinking of all day and how that makes you feel, and see what happens when you start thinking of different things and see how that makes you feel.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much. I know that was a little bit of a fun question for you, and I just
it was very fun.
Yeah, I just wanted to, and I feel like now I want to go back and reread the book with that aphorism in mind, just with a new lens. I think that would be really great. And yeah, so that is all the time we have for today. So I want to thank you again for being here and for telling us about all of this and sharing all this wonderful wisdom. I am very, very excited about this book. And I'm very excited to have had a chance to sit and chat with you and learn so much. So yeah, I just want to say thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me, Brooklyn. It was a pleasure. It was lots of fun.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Linguistically Aware. We hope you enjoyed our deep dive into the fascinating world of linguistics. If you'd like to learn more about linguistics, please visit our website, calgarylinguistics.ca. Until next time, keep exploring the beauty of language.